This is Richard Margison. For as long as he could remember, Richard has wanted to be a folk singer, like his heroes Gordon Lightfoot and Stan Rogers. And for a time in his youth, Richard lived his dream, touring the coffee shops and pubs of coastal British Columbia. Unfortunately, as with most of us, as Richard grew up, his goal got further away. Fate pulled him from his folk singing dream and pushed him into a new career as one of the leading operatic tenors in the world today. But sometimes, in between sold-out shows in New York and London, he still looks back and wonders what could have been. Richard Margison is the folk-singing opera star.
Really cool to be back here in the McPherson Playhouse Theater. I can remember my first performance here and how big this whole space felt. And, having most recently been on the stage at the Metropolitan Opera, where there's 4,200 seats, and here we're 840, it's really quite amazing to look at this house now and just see how small it is now to me. And in those days, it felt like the biggest theater on the planet. And building a career, it's interesting how things change your perception of space and time. And
he has a good heroic tenor voice. He's exactly right. His voice is really right for the big heroic parts in Italian, French, and indeed in German opera as well. He has a ringing top. And that's absolutely crucial for any singer. The top notes are the money notes. And Richard's is secure and it rings out through the house. More than that, the middle of his voice, the bottom, is quite, it's rich and velvety as well. So, if you like, he's got a complete voice there. Throughout his range, he's got something to offer. The tenor usually is the hero or the male love interest. And so you're going to, most tenor roles are leading roles. And he's a commanding figure on stage as well, which is important. It is, after all, an acted environment.
With opera in the schools, touring a lot with a small company to quite rural areas in British Columbia and in Alberta, I think, as well.
Driving through every kind of conceivable weather and putting up our little sets in all these various schools.
I remember once he was in Alberta, and I think they were staying on a pig farm, actually, while they were performing. So we had some really interesting experiences.
I did probably close to 2,000 shows through Vancouver, Edmonton, Calgary, and Manitoba opera companies over the space of about 4 years. So I swore I'd never want to go into another high school gymnasium, but my daughter's getting to that age now, so I guess I'm going to have to venture back.
He had his first big international break in England at English National Opera, and that was where international critics took him up and took notice of him.
I went to the Coliseum in London, which was supposed to be my honeymoon, but I got an offer to go and sing Verdi's Masked Ball at the last minute.
It was absolutely wonderful. It was so exciting, and the opening night ended up being a royal gala, and Princess Diana was there, and beyond exciting to realize that, you know, it was my little brother who was going to be coming out onto that stage and singing, you know, the lead role in that particular opera.
By doing so, got reviews from all over Europe, and I never did another audition after that.
In the years after that, he just kept adding the major centers to his schedule in Europe and in the United States as well.
There probably aren't too many countries he hasn't performed in. A lot in Australia, Chile and Peru, England, Germany, most countries in Europe.
And so his rise, it's fairly rapid in a sense. I mean, his career really stretches back over 20 years. I mean, he was singing before 1985, but his career at the forefront really started in 85. And he's been able to do it on both sides of the Atlantic, mainly in Italian and French opera, but now he's starting to move more and more into German opera as well.
Whew, the defining moment, I would have to say probably my Met debut. And it was appropriate that I was in a production of Madame Butterfly. I had Domingo conducting from the pit, and as I said at the time, I had more butterflies in my stomach than the production on stage, you know. But it was one of those moments that certainly when I was here in Victoria studying voice, I never dreamt that I would be on that stage. It was a dream come true in many ways. And just to think of all of the other artists who have walked on those boards, you know, before, yeah, it's the stuff of dreams.
The Met debut is still the watershed of an operatic career. This evening is special. Very few singers get Placido Domingo on the podium to conduct their debut.
I had the pleasure to hear Richard in San Francisco, and I find out that he was going to be making his Metropolitan debut, and I was conducting the Butterfly. So it was very thrilling, and really, I mean, today, finally, when we arrive, has been a great, great experience. His musicality, the beauty of the voice, has no doubt, and the public around the world will have the possibility to find really a great, great tenor.
Richard indeed has had a very distinguished career at the Metropolitan Opera. In fact, I think he's probably sung at the Met more often than any of his contemporaries over the last decade or so. He has a perfect voice for the Met. It's a very large house, and the Met favors very large productions, large-scale and lavish productions. And he both the scale of his voice, and he's a big guy himself as well, he registers very well in that house. I can think of two performances in the Met that I saw Richard in, one of Puccini's Turandot and one of Richard Strauss's Ariadne of Naxos, and I think they're probably the best performance I've ever seen of those two operas in that house, and in largely because Richard was so strong in both of them. He absolutely galvanized the audience.
While I knew he was very musically gifted, I certainly never imagined he'd be an opera singer.
Well, I think growing up in Victoria, I mean, certainly I love nature, I love the earth per se, and I think that that gave me a great sense of being grounded growing up here, and more appreciative of being going away to these incredible places like New York to do the Metropolitan Opera, but never forgetting Victoria or where I came from. And I think by doing that, it gave me a great sense of who I am and not get carried away with reading press about yourself and getting a swelled head, like so many.
Richard was born in 1953 in Victoria, and his birth mother was a young woman who had been very involved in music in her life. It was very important to her, and she stipulated that he was to be adopted by a musical family.
Certainly, that was the case. I mean, I went from musical roots to a musical environment. I mean, her parents were both musicians as well, and her grandparents, the whole line on that side of the family was all... years ago, they had a 23-piece vaudeville orchestra, the Hallorans, O'Halloran, which was my birth name, and they came from Ireland during the bad times, and they toured with a 23-piece vaudeville orchestra.
It was very important to her that he have that kind of encouragement and influence that, sadly, she was unable to provide to him at the time.
I always had opera around the house. I mean, Mom and Dad, Mom was a piano teacher and accompanist, and Dad, of course, I think could have had a career as a singer if he had wanted to, and was played viola in the Victoria Symphony, but he ended up running the family printing business, and I always had that in my ear all the time, but wasn't the thing that I wanted to do.
It wasn't the kind of household where if you wanted to be a writer or a musician, you were discouraged and, pushed more in the direction of engineering or business, quite the opposite.
Every day we'd come home from school, Mom would be teaching piano, and my sister and I would fend for ourselves after school and listen to all of the students going in and out of the living room, which was fine for a while. I got in trouble all the time, though, because I heard the piano students playing the same pieces over and over again, and I was in the kitchen, and I would whistle the tune that they should be playing, and I always got in trouble for correcting them from another room. But there you go.
Richard's mother was my piano teacher, so I would be at his house every week having my piano lesson.
Greg was pretty unteachable because he had such an incredible ear, and my mother persevered, but I think it was very quickly revealed that he had his own musical gift, and he and Richard connected around that.
After my piano lesson, Richard and I would stay at his house, and we would listen to music, and he was learning to play the guitar at that point. So it was just a natural progression for us to start playing music together around the piano in his mother's house.
Of course, Gordon Lightfoot was my inspiration as a young singer. That's who I wanted to be. I wanted to be another Lightfoot. I was writing songs, writing my own folk songs and playing the guitar. And
we were playing at every coffee house that we knew of. People were wanting Richard. They loved his voice. They loved his casual, free way of singing.
His eyes were red, his hopes were dead, and the wine was running low. And the old man came home from the forest. His tears fell.
It's a part of me that I've never lost, and it's a part of me that I can go back to and not sound like an opera singer singing folk music. I've always maintained that duality in not wanting to sound like an opera singer singing pop, which I must say at times I don't like when I hear that, but it's great to be able to pick up the guitar and just pick up where you left off, 10 years ago or whatever.
Good to see you.
Nice to see you.
Looks like you're prospering.
Oh, in more ways than one.
Yeah, exactly. I have the same problem.
Pussywillows, cattails, soft winds and roses, rain pools in the woodlands, water to my knees. rose, shivering, quivering, the warm breath of spring. Pussywillows, cattails, soft winds and roses. Catbirds and cornfields, daydreams together. Riding on the roadside, the dust gets in your eyes. Reveling, disheveling, the summer nights can bring. Pussywillows, cattails, soft winds and roses. Slanted rays and colored days, stark blue horizons, naked limbs and wheat bins, hazy afternoons, voicing, rejoicing, the wine cups to bring. Pussywillows, cattails, soft winds and roses. Harsh nights and candlelights, wood fires together, soft lips and fingertips resting in my soul, treasuring, remembering the promise of spring. Pussywillows, cattails, soft winds and roses.
I remember at a coffee house at our high school, we had played for half an hour and played all of our Gordon Lightfoot songs and all the songs that we knew, and we were done. And the rugby team had just come back from one of their winning rugby games, and they came in and started going, "We want Richard, we want Richard," and stamping their feet and stomping their feet. And so Richard was brought back again at this coffee house about 10:30 at night by popular demand made by the rugby team. So he played the whole set all over again and added some other songs too. So he was very, very popular, and people loved his voice and loved his singing.
It was actually the first time for me that I actually enjoyed school, because all of a sudden, going from being the one that was constantly picked on in school, all of a sudden you're playing at the coffee houses and you're somewhat of a hero in school. So, you know, it was kind of cool.
Now, at that time, Richard was not going to my high school. He was going to another high school at the time. The choir conductor was so impressed with Richard that he came up and wanted to be introduced right there on the spot. And so, of course, I introduced Richard to him, and he said, "I simply must have you in the choir. I must have you in the choir. The two of you as a team are going to really help the choir." So he moved heaven and earth to get Richard transferred from one high school to another. So Richard suddenly was going to the same high school I was at, which was Claremont. And so suddenly he just was up, and there he was in the other school. And so we were there together, and then immediately joined the choir.
British Columbia is this year 100 years old. And only the day before yesterday, these fellows found that their song was to be sung before the Queen when she arrives in Victoria to help us celebrate on May the 4th.
We were in England at the time with the Claremont School Choir when I got a phone call to say that the song that we had written for This Is British Columbia had been chosen by the provincial government to be performed at the Parliament buildings here in Victoria for the arrival of the Queen and Prince Philip and the royal family.
So here by Richard Margison and Greg Davidson for This is British Columbia.
From the grandeur of the Rockies to the green Vancouver Isle, we're proud of our province, every inch and every mile. Her rolling hills and jagged peaks and rivers running free, a gift of Mother Nature for one and all to see. For this is British Columbia, we've got so much if we can only see. A land that is still young, with a future just begun, where we can live in peace and harmony.
There we stood on the steps of the Parliament buildings with a 1,000-voice choir singing the chorus of the song that Greg and I had composed, and we had about 50,000 people all down the causeway and in boats, and it was quite the event.
When it came time for us to sing, the Queen came along regally, and the great big royal party kind of swept along, and they sat themselves in chairs just in front of us, facing away from us. And so we were kind of behind them up on the steps, and they were looking out, and we could see the Queen and Prince Philip all arranged there in the royal party.
Since the frontiers of the gold rush days, we've come a long, long way from the pioneers who blazed the sites on which we stand today. With their newfound hope, men traveled here from places far and wide, for freedom and great splendor, which to no man is denied. For this is British Columbia, we've got so much if we can only see. A land that is still young, with a future just begun, where we can live in peace and harmony.
Greg and I were walking on clouds for a little while after that, and meeting the royal family, and quite something. From there we went to what we called the marina circuit.
We decided that it would be a really cool thing for Richard and I to play music and make some money during the summer.
We did Bedwell Harbor and Silva Bay on Gabriola Island. There was a whole chain of marinas, April Point Lodge.
To play music at night and to work in the store or at the swimming pool or on the gas dock in the daytime. So Richard really took to working on the gas dock in the daytime.
Entertain 6 hours a night, 6 nights a week, and had a rep of, I guess we had about 400 songs.
And it was a neat thing for Richard and myself to be living away from home in staff quarters with other staff members, the girls on one side totally divided and the guys on the other side, without parents, quite independent, over on a Gulf island playing music. It was lots of fun.
Gordon Lightfoot was a big influence. Bruce Cockburn, Leonard Cohen, James Taylor, Stan Rogers, unfortunately, who died too young. Stan Rogers' songs, like Lightfoot's, are really such a wonderful set of photographs of this country and these people. You know, it's. I think that's what I find so wonderful about Lightfoot is that, you know, something like the Canadian Railroad trilogy. Now, there's an anthem for the country.
He's met Gordon Lightfoot, who I guess would be his all-time folk hero. And he also has met and has actually become quite good friends with Bruce Cockburn, certainly a Canadian icon in the same way. So I think that's been quite wonderful for him to make those connections.
We met at, if I remember correctly, it was in Moncton, It was some kind of television extravaganza with a whole bunch of artists, and we were both on the bill. And we got chatting a bit, and I listened to his stuff, and I'd never really heard music like that up close. You hear it going by, and I've never been a big fan of classical singing, or had not been up to that point.
It was the first time that I had been in that close proximity to Bruce and to a lot of people more in the pop field, and it was great actually, because we were sitting beside each other in the dressing room, and he was warming up and I was warming up, and we sort of shared ideas on what you did to, get the voice going.
And then he opened his mouth and sang. The visceral quality that came out in that singing at that distance was overpowering. I just burst into tears right on the spot, and it changed my whole attitude toward that music, and opened up a whole new world for me. Really, just that experience.
It's really great to have you here, Bruce.
Oh, thanks. It's great to be here. It's wonderful that we've talked about this for so long. Being able to sit down together and enjoy each other's company.
Exactly.
I'm very happy to be able to do it now. I love continuity. Hope you can read my writing, Brett.
Oh, I'm sure. I can read it upside down, so.
Okay, then you're all right. As long as you hold it upside down, you're all right. It's pretty simple. It's just these lines with the ascending stuff.
Yeah.
Cry out for the power of your own voice here, and this is what I wish. Every time I sing it, I think this would be really great if only I could have that.
Right.
What you have. Phrasing.
All the sirens, all the tongues, heaven's perfect all for me.
Yeah, it's like I can picture it. All the sirens, all the tongues, the song of every lung, heaven's perfect. Yeah, sorry. You know what? I'm going to screw you up if I don't have a guitar, because in my mind it's doing one thing, and what's coming out my mouth is not exactly what's in my mind. So
yeah.
So.
No, that's fine. That's all I need.
I think
that won't be a problem. Yeah. That's your brain on a piece of paper.
Yeah, well, or someone's version of. Yeah. I don't think it's my brain.
But nothing worth having comes without some kind of fight. Got to kick the darkness till it bleeds the shit through the night.
I'm thinking too hard. If I could just make a suggestion, I don't know how, I don't want to tread on your
you're not treading
personal
on
take on this stuff, but that second verse, where
these fragile bodies of touch and taste.
Fragile bodies of touch and taste. This vibrant skin, this hair like lace. I would think more about what the words are actually saying than about the specific kind of rhythm of the notes themselves. The relationship to each other of the notes.
For sure.
Because I think it'll be stronger if it's less strict and more kind of emphatic.
Okay. Cool.
So that's the only comment. But tomorrow.
Well, that's a good comment, because I know the guy who wrote this. Touch the face of God.
I wish I did. I spent
that's a life's journey.
Thousands of dollars trying to find out who this guy is. Anyway, so let's do it once more from the top and then go to the other songs.
Don't the hours grow shorter as the days go by? You never get to stop and open your eyes. One day you're waiting for the sky to fall. The next lovers in a dangerous time. These fragile bodies of touch and taste, this vibrant skin, this hair like lace, spirits open to the thrust of grace, never a breath you can afford to waste when you're lovers in a dangerous time. Lovers in a dangerous time. You're lovers in a dangerous time. Lovers in a dangerous time. When your lover's in a dangerous time, sometimes you're made to feel as if your love's a crime. But nothing worth having comes without some kind of fight. Got to kick at the darkness till it bleeds daylight. When your lover's in a dangerous time. Lovers in a dangerous time. Your lovers in a dangerous time. Lovers in a dangerous time.
I'm used to working in my own terms. You know, in my world, I'm the boss, and I like to get input from the people that I work with, but it's not a democracy. When you work with somebody else that's sort of on an equal footing in a duet sort of situation like this, it of course is much more democratic, and it's a different thing. But that's part of the fun too, because I don't always want to be in control, and knowing that the person that you're performing with is such a strong performer, and you can totally trust what they're going to do. It takes any kind of the need for control out of the picture.
Well, I think technically, I mean, you try to use the same technique that you would as an opera singer, but what you don't do is give it all of the beef that you would. And of course, starting out, I did a lot of coffee houses and folk music, light rock, and so it's kind of easy to switch back into that. It's pretty much the same, though. You're still selling words and selling sound, and it's just a different packaging.
Stare into the flame filled up with feelings I can't name.
It's interesting, you know, I wanted to be doing what you're doing, what Lightfoot was doing, and, you know, Stan Rogers, and I end up in opera. I think it's amazing.
Well, you picked it, didn't you?
Well, actually, it kind of picked me, too.
Yeah,
it kind of picked me, too.
Because you would have done the other.
I was doing that, you know,
Yeah.
I was touring, and I felt like I was banging my head against the wall playing some of these places with people throwing beer cans around, and, I mean, it's not, what is this? And
I think he found it somewhat unrewarding the longer he did it, because of course you're often playing to audiences who are really, you know, not there to necessarily listen to the person who's performing, and I think he, you know, perhaps realized that you know, was not necessarily going to be the way he wanted to lead his life.
Terrible deeds done in the name of tunnel vision and fear of change. Surely our expressions of a soul that's turned its back on love. All the sirens, all the tongues, the song of air in every lung, heaven's perfect alchemy. Put me with you and you with me, come on. Put that in your heart. Put it in your heart.
Richard got a little bit discouraged at times because we felt like we were in the background playing for people that were talking really loudly and not really listening, and were they supposed to clap when he was finished or not, and it just kind of seemed a little bit too much in the background.
Greg decided to go into the piano tuning business, and he had some other avenues in his life he wanted to explore with his wife, and I decided actually to go and get a degree in music so I could teach music in the schools.
All the sirens, all the tongues, the song of air in every lung, heaven's perfect alchemy. Put me with you and you with me, come on. Put that in your heart. Come on. Put it in your heart. Put it in your heart. Put it in your heart.
While I knew he was very musically gifted, I don't think I had ever imagined that he would go in the direction of opera. So that was quite a departure for him, and the contact that he made, you know, his relationship with Selena James, his voice teacher, and other people that he met, certainly as he started proceeding along that road, really ended up taking his career in a dramatically different directions.
Ended up after my first year auditioning for voice, to be a major in voice, and they said, I didn't have the potential for an operatic career, so I left the university and been working ever since. Well, I wouldn't say no promise, but it was sort of Elton John sings opera in those days, so I can understand to a certain extent that some people couldn't see, you know, through that sort of rock and roll exterior to see that there actually was a voice there. But my teacher, Selena James, was convinced.
When Richard came into my studio with the intention of studying with me, I just took one look at him and looked at his physical stature, and I thought if the voice is there, he could have a career. And as soon as he opened his mouth up, I knew that he had it.
Now here we are at the wonderful Craigdarroch Castle, which was, when I started out, it was the Conservatory of Music. I was just at the end of a stint doing rock and roll and pop music, and one of the stipulations Selena made to me was that I had to check my guitar at the door when I entered the studio, and I had to focus more on serious exercises, vocal exercises and music, and not do my rock and roll anymore.
And I just advised him that if he were going on with a career, he would have to put the guitar in the corner and make his decision then whether he wanted to go on with the classical training.
One thing I never told her is that I never stopped doing the rock and roll. I still do today.
Well, I just felt that even though he mainly was interested in folk singing, that there was a lot more potential, partly because of his physical self, and of course a lot to do with that core of the sound, which is so beautiful, which could develop, I thought, into a really operatic tenor.
I think Selena was just really key in recognizing the talent that he had, and that it could be directed towards classical music, towards opera, rather than folk. And I think she basically just said to him, you know, get rid of the guitar, and you know, this is what you should be doing.
She sort of opened the world of opera to me and said, you know, there's so much that it has to offer, not only the singing, but you get to work with the orchestra, the chorus, there's all the drama involved in it, and yeah, it became my mission from that point on.
Richard sort of moved more fully into opera, I think, from the folk singing, because that's the way his voice went in the end, once he started to train, and once he was with Selena James, his teacher, who helped guide him.
Quite a few people didn't feel that that was going to happen with him, but I knew it would, and it eventually did.
Nella tua fredda stanza guardi le stelle che tremano d'amore e di speranza, ma il mio mistero è chiuso in me. Saprà, no, no, sulla tua bocca lo dirò quando la luce splenderà.
That silence that you hear in the house, you know, when you know that you have complete control of those people and you're taking them on this emotional journey. It's great, you know, and for me, taking on the guise of Riccardo in Masked Ball or Otello or Don Carlo, any of these roles, you get to bring all of your life experience to it and relate it to the character, and in some ways purge yourself. I mean, the audience is like a big psychiatrist, because you go out there and you may have the same emotions that these characters have, and you can go out there and just let fly, you know, and it's like, wow, that feels good. I feel great after the fact.
destined, all'alba vincerò, vincerò, vincerò.
His heroes are all folk singers, like the Gordon Lightfoots and the Stan Rogers. That's really what he wanted to be when he started off. He talks of them as troubadours, and I think there's an element in which Richard is an operatic troubadour, in which he's not singing folk songs anymore, but he's singing opera arias in complete productions. And so I think his career has been very much that of a traveling musician. I mean, I think that's what he's tried to, that's what he wanted to do in the first place, though not necessarily in this genre, but that's what he's ended up doing.
Domingo actually has been a role model in many ways for me, just watching the way he has run his career. And at, 70 now, he's still singing well. So to me, that is a wonderful role model. Not that I want to be singing when I'm 70, I don't know. There are days when I say if I won the lottery, I'd quit tomorrow, but I don't really think that I could stand giving it up. It's, you know, you're given a gift, and I think it's your mandate that you have to be the best custodian of that gift that you have and share it with people, because not everybody can do it, and I think that for that moment in time you can hopefully elevate people from an everyday life and problems and worries. For that moment that you're singing on stage can elevate them to a different place and, you know, make some difference in the world.
The one consistency in Richard's career, I think, I mean, from the time he was very young, was that he wanted to be a singer. And that he's done. And I think, you know, along the way in his late teens, early 20s, opera took over from what had driven him when he was singing during his teen years, either in solo or in the groups that he sang in at the time.
I think it's good to have a grounding in folk music to give you the importance of just what that's all about in terms of communication. It's a wonderful, wonderful gift to be given this opportunity. We're given a gift to sing, and I think as such we have to be the best custodian of that gift as we can, and it's meant to be shared. Whether we get joy out of it all the time or not is another thing. I mean, there are days when it feels like a job, and that's when you need to stop and look at it and say, look, you know, I got into this for a reason, and rekindle that love affair with the art form and with the music.
Sempre il sogno